All right, let's dive into an idea that honestly cuts right against so much of what we're told. It's called the Realism Advantage, and it's all about how your brain might actually be built to favor cold, hard facts over some hopeful fantasy. You've heard it a million times, right? Just think positive, visualize success. But what if, and just hear me out, what if that's not just a little unhelpful, but it's actually bad advice? I mean, for decades, the self-help world has been selling us this incredibly powerful promise. If you just believe in success, it's gonna happen. That your optimism is this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. But what if the science tells a totally different story? It turns out our brains and our long-term happiness might just operate on a completely different principle, a much more realistic one. So let's start with a major reality check. And this is backed by some data that might really surprise you. Okay, so where does this all come from? Well, this isn't just a hunch, it's from a massive study. We're talking researchers from the University of Bath and the London School of Economics, who tracked 1,600 people for almost 2 decades. They were basically comparing people's financial hopes with what actually happened. You could call it the ultimate 18-year-long test of positive thinking. And get this, the results were absolutely stunning. When it came to long-term well-being, to life satisfaction, who do you think came out on top? It was not the optimists. It was the realists. They reported the highest levels of happiness. Then came the optimists, and way down at the bottom were the pessimists. So that just begs the question, right? Why? Why would having realistic expectations actually lead to more happiness than just hoping for the best? Well, it turns out there's something the researchers call the optimism penalty. And this isn't some tiny niche thing. This penalty affects a huge number of us. The study estimates that a staggering 80%, that's 80, of the population can be classified as unrealistic optimists. It seems like we're kind of wired as a species to hope for the best and downplay the bad stuff. And the psychological cost here is really the key. For optimists, the problem is that huge gap between their high hopes and what actually happens. The study calls it destructive disappointment. But it's no better for pessimists. They live in this constant state of dread, which just cancels out any good feelings they might get from a pleasant surprise. See, both extremes totally miss that realistic sweet spot in the middle. You can almost map out this emotional roller coaster that optimists go on. It's a cycle. You start by setting these really high expectations, right? And that feels great at the moment. You get that buzz of anticipation. But then, reality doesn't quite match up. And that high is replaced by a pretty serious dose of disappointment. Now, imagine that cycle repeating over and over for 18 years. It really takes a toll. You know, Dr. Chris Dawson, one of the authors of the study, just nails the practical problem here. He said, plans based on inaccurate beliefs make for poor decisions and are bound to deliver worse outcomes. And that's it right there. It's not just about feelings, it's about actions. Realism leads to better choices about your job, about your savings, about risk, and that, in the long run, leads to better results. Okay, so the psychological data is crystal clear. But this is where it gets even more profound. Why on earth would our brains be built this way? To answer that, we have to jump from psychology over to neuroscience and take a look at the messy, brilliant hardware we are all running on. This brings us to the brain's messy genius. It's all about understanding that the things we might see as flaws are actually its greatest strengths. So a really groundbreaking neuroscience paper introduced this idea of non-ideal factors. Now, these are things that classical science used to just dismiss as imperfections, like background noise in the system, randomness, inconsistency in our neurons. But the new thinking is, wait a minute, these aren't bugs. They are essential features. So how on earth can these flaws actually help us? Well, that neural noise can actually help us pick up on really weak signals we might otherwise miss. The diversity or heterogeneity of our neurons, that prevents the entire system from crashing if one little part fails. That chaos you hear about, it's what lets our minds jump flexibly from one thought to another. And errors, well, errors are literally the engine of how we learn and adapt. Our brain is built on this foundation of useful imperfection. This quote from the research is everything. It says our brain's power emerges because of its messiness, not in spite of it. Think about that. Our brain is specifically designed to work with a complex, unpredictable, and noisy reality, not some idealized, perfectly positive one. So, let's bring these two powerful ideas together. How can we start to think more like our brains are actually designed to think? And this is really the ultimate takeaway. Being a realist, it has nothing to do with being cynical or negative. It's about working with your own biology. It's like adopting a mental model that perfectly matches your brain's own reality-based, error-correcting, and incredibly adaptive operating system. Let's just break it down like this. The optimist, they're trying to filter out all the negative data. The pessimist, they're obsessing over it. In both cases, they're basically fighting against their brain's natural design, which is to process all the messy, non-ideal information it gets. The realist is the only one who's actually aligned with the brain's core design. They embrace the full, complex picture to make the best possible call. And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. We spend so much time and energy trying to force ourselves to be positive. But what if the true path to well-being isn't about mastering our thoughts at all, but about getting a whole lot better at mastering reality?